Hey, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good. All right, so I'm going to introduce the panelists this afternoon. We've got Austin Arensberg from Scrum, Courtney Nelson from BDMI, Jenny Gao from Bessemer, and Siggi Hindrichs from SamsungNEXT. So thank you, everyone, for joining this afternoon. I thought maybe we could kick things off by everybody just giving a quick 2-minute intro on the firm that you're with and the types of deals you're looking at. Just a quick overview.
Great. Hi, my name is Jenny. I'm at Bessemer Venture Partners. I'm based in the New York office, but we're not geographically constrained. We divide ourselves up by what we internally call roadmaps. So that's just trying to create thesis-driven investments across areas like voice, software infrastructure, healthcare, cybersecurity. So excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Austin. I'm from Scrum Ventures. We're located just a couple blocks from here at 3rd and Market. We're a seed and Series A firm, invest relatively small checks of around $250,000 to $300,000. And we've invested in everything from robotics, conversational commerce, e-commerce, you name it. So a really wide range of investments.
Hi guys, thanks for being here. I'm Courtney. I'm with BDMI, which is Bertelsmann's venture fund. So Bertelsmann is a media and tech holding company with about $20 billion in annual revenue. So we invest with the strategic interests of the different Bertelsmann business units in mind. We spend most of our time in the future of media, and we define that as information consumption, creation, or distribution. So that can take a ton of different forms, and that can span all the way into things that touch commerce businesses and maybe trickle back into businesses that are more enterprise SaaS at their core. So we'll do seed through Series B, and we're headquartered in New York.
Hi, everyone. I'm with SamsungNEXT, and SamsungNEXT is a corporate innovation arm at Samsung that exists to make Samsung itself a better software and services company. We have 4 main levers that we can pull to work with companies to meet them where they are and to serve Samsung's interests. Those are partnerships, mergers and acquisitions, internal product development, and then also ventures. The majority of my work is on the ventures team, where we invest seed through Series B. On the seed side, we do check sizes up to $1 million, with an average check size probably closer to $400K. We are proud dashbot investors at the seed stage. Ooh. We are also not geographically constrained, but our investments do tend to be clustered around our offices. I sit in our San Francisco office, which is one of our 3 offices where we offer co-location to our seed stage companies. We are broadly interested in frontier tech, generally software-focused, software-only, hardware-adjacent. Let's see, and I think that's it.
Okay, thanks, everyone. So I'm with Orrick. Orrick's a large global law firm. For those who are not familiar, we work with companies from the earliest stage all the way up through the largest public companies out there, and a variety of investors, both corporate and traditional, in the process. So maybe we'd kick things off with sort of an overview question in terms of what are investors looking at in the chatbot or voice space? And no particular order, so if anybody would like to start, jump in. And I guess I would invite the audience to ask a few questions along the way if there are any questions. We will have some time for Q&A at the end, but if there's some burning question you have, just jump on in. So with that, I'll let either of you answer.
Sure. So I can speak to the way that we think about constructing a thesis in the conversational interface space. So very broadly, we have 4 categories. So we have the first one at the top of the value chain, which is the hardware that any of these conversational interfaces live on. The second piece there is the software that's powering any sort of conversational assistant. So let's say that's like Amazon Alexa, for example, or any of the software that powers natural language processing. We bucket into that category. The third category we create are voice first or bot first skills or companies that are building out adjacencies in those spaces. So those are more of like the content creation businesses. And then the last bucket we think about is the kind of like picks and shovels infrastructure businesses that are supporting the ecosystem as a whole. Historically, we've been spending most of our time in the picks picks and shovels and infrastructure investments, as evidenced by our early investment in Dashbot. And we've looked at businesses in the content creation space, but ultimately are spending more of our time in that like picks and shovels infrastructure space right now still.
We like to bucket it into two different areas. The first is what are the new types of experiences that can be unlocked by a voice or bot platform. And the second one would be what are the experiences that are much better on a conversational interface. So when I think of logistically complex or fragmented decision-making processes like booking travel or figuring out what type of insurance to buy, that is something that's perfect for something like a chatbot or an Alexa skill. And we've seen a lot of that happening over the past 18, 24 months with the companies that have popped up trying to solve some of these problems, where I think there's still a lot of greenfield and a lot of investor interest, but maybe less criteria because we don't know what to look for yet, or what are these new types of experiences that are being unlocked because they're just not created yet. So,
I think to echo a little bit of what you just said, I think we think about chat as an underlying technology, chat and voice here, but also encourage entrepreneurs to think about problems that can be, the solutions for which can be unlocked using chat, and caution teams that we see, especially early on, that say, you know, we have this great tool, chat, or we have this great tool, voice, and we want to throw it at a problem. We find that frequently the problem-focused approach is generally will get you to a better place.
And since everyone has been talking about chatbots primarily on the panel so far, I'll talk about some of the things that we're looking at that are slightly different. We've become really excited recently in voice cloning and text-to-speech, and think that there's a whole slew of applications that exist there that really have been limited primarily due to the fact that voice has been very difficult to produce at a scale, or I should say a quality that's quite human-like. And I don't know if folks here listened to the news or saw the news last week of some recent developments in Google WaveNet, but it's absolutely startling how good the quality is for synthetic voice. And so we're beginning to think about and form theses around that and what kind of industries can be impacted, especially when text-to-voice becomes more popular.
Thank you. Austin, can you talk a little bit more about any particular use cases that you're excited about on the voice front?
So we've been looking actually in the past few weeks, as I mentioned, to text-to-speech. And audiobooks is a really good example. So ways that you can scale voices in audiobooks. We've also been looking at, imagine if you will, you could create like a variety of different textual information that you could then translate into voices. You could then clone your voice and create a digital self. That digital self could then be manifested in a chatbot. And so, you know, 5-10 years from now, why have a Facebook page when you can actually have your digital self representing you and responding to people that are interested to speak to you? So it's we're trying to get our head around it right now, but that gives you an example of a kind of stretch use case.
It's cool stuff. Would any of the other panelists like to comment on any specific use cases that they're, you know, looking forward to seeing or you know, paying a lot of attention to, whether it's on the voice side or on the chat side?
So I think to echo an earlier point, what we're really looking for in this space are things that should and can only be consumed through a chatbot interface or through a voice skill. And oftentimes, like what we're specifically looking for are people who are thinking creatively about the ways to foster a deeper connection with their customer, particularly on the commerce side of things. And for a lot of the skills and voice that have been built out around this, it's about connecting with the customer at different life points for them, right? Are they getting ready in the morning, and do they want to talk about their makeup application routine, right? That's not specifically tied to a product transaction necessarily, or it isn't right now, but it's you stepping in that whole customer journey that ingratiates you with the person, with the customer on a different layer, and we're excited about things that are taking new forms in that sense.
Yeah, echoing Courtney here, I think we think about voice and chat as a way to, particularly from a Samsung perspective, as a way to think about how devices can disappear in everyone's lives, and instead of yelling out to your Alexa when you want it to answer a question, how it can fit more seamlessly into your life and disappear.
And then on the consumer side, one interesting use case and one question that I've been asking a lot is, what does a generation of Alexa-raised kids look like? And so that's everything from gaming and entertainment, because we're seeing a lot of traction there with gaming skills and gaming on Facebook Messenger platform, to education, being able to teach children very repetitive things like your multiplication table or how to spell, because Alexa has that patience when you might not necessarily want to do that all day long. And so I think there are a lot of interesting implications if we look towards a generation of new people that are Alexa native or voice native.
Yeah, I can... Go ahead.
Jenny inspired me to be more specific. Two industries that we're actually digging in on what's happening in voice in particular are health and wellness and habit formation that is critical to that industry, and compliance, which is absolutely critical to that industry. How voice skills can help build that up. And then the second one is kids, like Jenny mentioned, and families and parenting, basically. So how do we do a skill that allows interaction and kind of family fun time away from a screen? How does it stimulate a learning experience that then can be multimodal, that maybe takes a different form in the classroom, but at home is done through a voice skill to kind of increase learning at home that's already been maybe the same type of concept has been taught in the academic setting, but to do reinforcement at home.
Yeah, thank you. I would reinforce kind of what you guys were saying with the Alexa generation. An interesting example is I have a 3-year-old at home, and we often use Alexa to do story time, to do music and songs, and it's become such a part of his regular routine that we were in the car last week, and he was yelling at the car saying, "Alexa, lights on, lights off," and I don't have Alexa in my car, unfortunately, yet. But totally agree that there's this whole concept of an Alexa-enabled generation that will expect all of their daily interactions to be controlled by a voice.
Well, just to add to that, I was speaking to a founder last week who was telling me about a device that he's created to actually record children's voices to understand where they're at in the development timeline. So what are the types of words they're saying? Are they saying complete sentences? And that will basically give feedback to the parents. So this idea of putting recording devices surrounding our kids all the time, but then also when you move outside of the home, you can imagine a world where the Google Home and the Alexa is actually sitting next to you in your office. And so there's been a use case I saw recently where there's an Alexa skill, very, very simple application where it was just logging lawyers' legal time, right? So I spent 15 minutes working with client A. I spent 20 minutes working with client B. Just as a very, very simple logging skill. So we're trying to imagine what would happen if you have every single meeting that you go to at your office recorded and every single interaction with your child recorded as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point. Like maybe the right investment category for the next thing we look at is something that's like a derivative away from an actual conversational interface. So to be specific, another application that's happening in medicine right now is that, another case that's applicable to medicine is if you look at the cadence and the diction and the vocabulary that people use, you can pick up on early clues into Alzheimer's or other diseases that might come into play in someone's life later on, right? So that's something that you can pull from the data layer that's coming from these conversational interfaces, but isn't like a primary investment in a exact chatbot, if that makes sense. So we're definitely trying to think about this like in a full spectrum. What does this data actually mean, and like how is this new interaction method changing the world?
Cool. Well, obviously you guys are investing in things that are not voice and chatbot related. But as far as the importance of voice and chatbot related technologies in your overall portfolio approach, can you talk a little bit about that, and if that needle has moved for you as far as your portfolio is concerned, how has it moved and how dramatically and over what period of time?
I can start off.
Thank you.
So that kind of brings up a little bit of the historical context. So what is voice? What is conversational commerce, if you want to call it that? How do you place it in its context? I think for us, we don't look at it as a moment of like, okay, this is the App Store launching, or this is some new product category. For us, we look at it as a customer user interface. And so then you need to think of it in a historical timeline of the mouse, right? And frankly speaking, for me, I think the last time in my personal life that there was something this impactful was really, I don't know if you all remember this, but in 2006, there was a TED Talk with Jeff Hahn, and he showed a multi-touch sensor. And in that presentation, I remember I watched it back then, and I thought, wow, we're going to react with our data. We're going to interact with our screens in a completely and totally different way. And now it is instinctual for us to take our two fingers to zoom. And so you see children doing that. And so from us, from a portfolio perspective, we see it as a similar huge moment where I don't know if there's even particular categories that we would put it in, and that's why we're really trying to understand. We take almost every single meeting with any kind of voice or chatbot type of company that comes across our way, because we're trying to struggle with how broad the impact is across all sorts of different markets and industries.
Yeah, I think I touched on this when I gave my intro, but we're interested in the way that people are creating or consuming or sharing information. So if you look at like using a very basic media application, if you look at what people did 10 years ago, the KPI to measure against was how many people were doing like direct traffic to a media company's like homepage, and that was like a great KPI to measure success of the media company against, right? But now that's totally different, right? People like getting their information in newsletter form. People like getting it in text messages or in their like flash briefing in the morning. So we're really focused on like how that evolution has changed of information sharing.
We've been excited, I think, again, as evidenced by our investment in Dashbot, about the data analytics side of it. And I think suddenly we have this mass quantity of data about how people interact with their devices, but also with other humans or things they think are other humans, and with their retailers and with their friends and with their potential restaurant reservation booking systems. There's all this data that just didn't exist before. And so I'm definitely curious to see companies who are experimenting with that data in interesting ways and segmenting it.
At Bessemer, we try to be as thesis-driven as possible, so we already have a dozen plus pretty much fully baked roadmaps. And so it's really interesting to think about this extra layer. So what happens when we layer in voice or a new conversational channel into one of our roadmaps? So for instance, the mobile field worker is something that we think a lot about. It's one of our roadmaps. How does the mobile phone affect a field worker, whether you're a construction worker or you're a doctor, wherever you are? And I think we can add that same question with voice. So if you're a construction worker or if you're a doctor who needs to transcribe notes, now you have your hands free, and what does that look like? And so I think it's just adding a much more nuanced layer into a lot of the investment theses that we already try to have. And so it's affecting a lot of our thinking.
Cool. So rather than asking you all about where do you see the future of chatbots and voice going, I would love to know if there's a sort of pie-in-the-sky application that you see now that 10 years from now may be realistic and right now just seems kind of pipe dreamish and certainly out on the horizon.
There's a cartoon that I really like that is a picture of somebody like running out the front door, and then there's a picture of the refrigerator with like a thought bubble over it that says like, don't forget to buy the milk. And I think that like that is the view 10 years from now that's a little bit freaky, but also, taps into what like multimodal computing could look like, right? Like how do you have a real-time understanding of things that you need to do in your life or things that are changing and have that ability to get the information across multiple different formats? I think that's like what we're really excited about, and what a lot of conversational interface innovation touches to and brings to the future.
I think as voice is being added and conversational intelligence is being added into IoT and just all of the things that aren't necessarily a device, so our thermostat, well, thermostats are a device, but our thermostats and the wall and in our car, the pie in the sky vision would just be speaking and everything is sort of ambient and always on. I guess it's not super pie in the sky either because it's happening right now, but imagining the implications for that are pretty profound.
Siggi?
Yeah, I would also say I was thinking about some applications, but they're not so pie in the sky in that there are companies definitely working on these problems. There are several companies that just came out of the recent Y Combinator batch working on voice and chat specifically, but one of them is working on the digitized self. And I think the intersection of AI, chat, voice, and NLP more specifically is really interesting, so this particular company looks a cross between the Whale app and Quora, where it looks like a question answering platform where you might give it access to your digital presence, your email, your calendar, your chat history, and it can mine that to find questions and answers that you've already created for it. So what's your favorite color? Well, at some point in some email you said it was blue. And what restaurants have you been to? Well, your Foursquare history says that you've been to these restaurants. And so it's one thing, if you're me and you don't get that many emails asking you about your favorite color, but it's another if you're an influencer of some sort that is fielding fans and fielding interactions with people that you don't know. That's the first level of this company. I think the next level is that the company can mine all of that data to infer answers to questions that you haven't answered yet. And then the next level, I think that is most interesting, is that you can have this application where you might say, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 1 year, I'm not sure, hey Alexa, I want to go to dinner tonight with Courtney. Find me a restaurant that we would both like, that neither of us have been to, and that is going to have, that's too easy, but I was going to say have this particular dish on the menu, but where you can have really cross-context intelligence inferred from past behaviors.
Cool.
Yeah, I think if everyone closed their eyes, they would have a sense of what Alexa sounded like or what Google Home would sound like, because we interact with it all the time. But if we close our eyes and imagine what Chevron sounds like, or Forever 21, or McDonald's, what is that voice? And is that something that brands are forsaking right now? And how much longer will that last? So I'm very interested in the idea of branded voice. We have spent, as an economy, billions of dollars on establishing gold and yellow means McDonald's, but we haven't established a kind of auditory anchor for those brands. And I don't think that's something that will be lost for long. I think we will see brands coming in and understanding the need to have a tone in their conversation with their customers. And it just brings up so many fascinating questions. I mean, what is the voice of Chevron? Should it be male? Should it be female? Does gender even matter? When you chat with Forever 21 to look for a particular sizing, should it respond like a teenage girl, like the customers that it serves? It's really unclear right now, but there's a lot of opportunity in this space.
Cool. These are all very interesting topics. Thank you, everyone. One thing that I want to touch on now that's near and dear to probably everybody in the audience is, in addition to really high-quality teams like we have at our hosts here at Dashbot, what else are you guys looking for when contemplating investments in this space?
I think there are still a lot of unanswered questions around monetization and UX and technical limitations. So it's really important for a team to be able to iterate very quickly and just be very product obsessed. And so they'll be able to be flexible enough to just answer all of the various challenges that are thrown their way, especially as the environment and a lot of the picks and shovels firm up over the next 24 months.
I think the way that we think about this space and the way we think about a lot of spaces overall is what would be the reaction if your company went away? So if you're an enterprise software tool, who's going to be freaking out at the company if budget cuts mean that your software goes away? Like, how does their life stop if that goes away? And for the consumer application, the same thing. Like, why are they going to be wanting to have your app on their phone or go out of their way to interact with your product? And that like stickiness factor and that fandom factor, they're hard to measure, but that's really what we want to see in early companies. And you know, the monetization question is definitely something that ties in here, right? And is an early indicator of how product market fit could look like. But there's other KPIs that can point to that as well.
We like to see, actually, the chatbots are inherently scalable, but we like to see companies that are actually geographically proximate to their initial customers. And that's not always as easy as it seems, because when you're a young company, seed stage, you'll take whatever customers you get. But when you have a chance to see your customers interacting with the chatbot, literally watching them as they interact with it, you can see where they stop. So there's kind of dark data that doesn't exist. It's not represented in the analytics that can be pulled down from the actual interface. It's that moment in time where someone looks at a chat and says, this is just weird, and they don't even bother responding. And so I think that's really important when you have a chance to actually see your customers and get a good feel for how they're using the product.
Okay, I think we'll open it up for questions now. Somebody will bring you a mic, hang on.
I have to. Hello.
Start speaking and see if it works.
Hello.
Can we turn on mic 7?
7?
So I have two questions. What kind of assets do you expect from a chatbot company? Do you ever expect an IPO for companies that are built around a bot?
Well, I think that this space is so nascent that it's hard for me to predict exits like that. Like, I think that the vision for a company that becomes like a standalone IPO company is something that's like transformational across that sector as a whole. So I think that like the companies right now that we're seeing at the seed stage are like kind of single use case or single feature companies. So if they're expanding across the ecosystems to kind of like build this behemoth that really capitalizes on the industry opportunity as a whole, maybe that goes on to be a standalone company. But I think that's another point that we think about when we're looking at investing in a business is this a product or a feature, or is this a standalone company? And you know, there's no right answer to either, right? Like, there's amazing companies that are acquisition candidates, and there's amazing companies that are IPO candidates. It's just something that we want to make sure that we're cognizant of and understand also what the founder's ultimate vision is.
Thank you.
Any other question? Oh, here we go. Thanks.
How do you put a value on something that's truly bleeding edge and there are no comparisons to be had?
I think Courtney touched on this earlier, but a lot of it is the initial reception and how much public love there is. That is undeniable. So maybe we won't see monetization immediately, maybe we won't be able to have well-defined KPIs, but if you're talking to customers and you're talking to end users and they love the experience, that is something that we value and paramount to anything else, especially at an early stage investment.
And one other comment on that, I would imagine that team plays a very large role in that determination at any early stage company.
Yeah, I think the other point would be capital investment required to get to the business to that next growth hurdle as well, right? There's some businesses that are incredibly capital intensive but are in like very nascent industries. So we try to think about like what the trade-off is in terms of like bridging investment until we can get to that first dollar of revenue, and then bridging that investment until that business is ultimately able to control its own destiny and cash flow.
I'd also add that bleeding edge aside, the only thing we know about any startup's financial forecast is that it's wrong. It's all guesses, it's all assumptions. They just have to be grounded in some form of truth, whether it's analogies or hopes.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, panel.
Yeah.
Oh, did we have one more? Okay, excuse me.
Hello. So this may be a little off topic, but I was just curious, as we know that a lot of the top careers in the future haven't been created yet. So let's say there's a career created for chatbot analytics. What do you think would be the most important skill for this? Or any other career that may be created for chatbot specific?
So I think that like what we touched on the panel, I think a number of us did, would be, I think what's an interesting opportunity right now for people who are interested in this space is almost like carving out their own role at a company dedicated to this. So I really like the brand example of like, you know, if you're a retail company, how are you thinking about multiple customer touch points? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for people like in marketing, for example, to say, I'm going to be the domain expert on this. Like, I'm going to come up with how our data categorization should look, or what type of like voice development we should look at to make sure that we're on the right channels. And I think that that's like a totally new dynamic in like marketing in particular that would be really interesting, that you can kind of like, you know, pivot your way in and really carve your own niche into. I think that like if you're speaking more about somebody who's just graduating college that's looking for a career in this space, I think just the fundamentals in computer science and all of that are pretty crucial, and an understanding of like the full end-to-end layer of what it means to play in this space, and kind of those 4 buckets that I touched upon earlier.
If you're thinking specifically about chatbot analytics, I mean, I would say I would echo the need that we hear from most of our portfolio companies that are at all invested in analytics, which is data science and data visualization skills.
Okay, last call.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everyone.
That's it. Thank you very much.